Hello, welcome to once again another one of these amazing podcasts here at The Idea of a Man. This is podcast number 11, and we are going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, actually, which is that of the soul, a little bit further on. But before we get into the topic of today's podcast, let's discuss quickly what we do here at The Idea of a Man, because this might be the first podcast of mine that you ever come across. So welcome and thank you indeed for joining me. I don't take it for granted in any way, shape or form in this attention economy that there are people who are listening to the podcasts that I put out. I do believe that these are going to be critically important. The first 12 maybe let's add another 4 to that, so let's say first 16 podcasts are going to be all that I'll be doing on my own. After that, then I do hope and trust we will be getting some exciting guests. There are some things lining up and some networking that's been happening and some conversations in the background. So I'm very excited about some of the people that we will be having conversations with here at The Idea of a Man. And really, the question here at The Idea of a Man is always what it's always about, which is basically, what is your idea of a man? Because here out in this world, as individual and unique men, we're all living these lives, and there is a lot of chatter, a lot of media attention, a lot of conversations, a lot of people expressing to us as individual people how we should conduct ourselves as men, how we should live out our lives, and sometimes that can become a bit much, and sometimes it's a distraction, and sometimes it's based in things that are actually not true, and certainly perhaps not true for us as individuals. And that's the thing with this: it's not a one size fits all. We are unique and individual people, and knowing ourselves, being true to ourselves, getting to live out the essence of who we actually are as people is critical and key to our mental and emotional well-being, to us living balanced and meaningful lives, and also to us be able to give the gift that we as a unique individual are here to give to the earth on which we walk. But getting, peeling back the onion and getting to the basis of that reality, understanding who we are as unique men, can sometimes be quite a journey, and there is sometimes a lot of fluff in front of us. Some of that is our own pain, some of that is our own wounds, and some of that is the things that have happened to us and our reactions and responses to to the external stimuli of life, whether it be our upbringing, whether it be our schooling, whether it be the things that life has done to us since we say entered the workforce. All these different things have huge impacts upon us, the culture in which we grow up in, and sometimes we're unaware of how these things are impacting us, and more importantly, sometimes we're unaware of how much they are impacting, like, our physiology, our mental emotional state, like our mental emotional well-being. Like, are we actually sane? Are we physically healthy? Are we by default of the stress that we've taken on as individual men, giving ourselves things like high blood pressure? Sometimes a lot of people break down the word disease into dis-ease. There's like sometimes a dis-ease inside of ourselves, which is caused by the things that take place to us and through us and within us, which we don't pay attention to until it's sometimes too late, until until life has done enough things to us, and then we are forced to pay attention. All of a sudden we realize, wait a minute, this way that I've lived, this ideology to which I've subscribed, has had an impact upon me, and perhaps I need to rethink the game. At that point, then there's a lot of, they say, prevention is better than cure. If we could prevent certain things by putting out good content, which is what we're all about here at The Idea of the Man, that can help us to identify with the reality of who we are as unique and individual men, so that we clear up a lot of our mess, deal with our wounds, deal with our issues as early as possible. And I do believe that the quality of the lives we are living can be greatly enhanced. And why that's important is because, again, and I've referenced this before, and I guess it's a big point here at The Idea of a Man, just looking at the statistics, which is a great motivation behind why I do what I do in terms of creating The Idea of a Man and putting this material out there. The statistics of, say, male suicide, male homicide, male violence, male domestic violence and abuse, all these kind of things, men's mental health, across the board. It's a bad story. It's not good. It doesn't make anybody happy. And if you have half a heart as a person, even if you're quote unquote a bad man, and you look at that, you're going to look at it and say something's wrong. This is not a good situation. So anybody with half a brain cell inside their head is going to look at this situation and say, what can be done about it? And well, here we are doing something about it. And we want to go to the core. So to go to the core from my own lived experience, from my own experience as a man, I've experienced and understood that a big issue here is the fact that as men, we are often pigeonholed into these ideas of what we should be doing. And so we begin to live performative lives. We begin to live existences that really have nothing to do with, no reflection that's based upon the truth of who we are. And we become aliens to ourselves. We don't even know who we are. There's these tropes within society. We say these words, it comes from actually the Sibyl, the oracle of old, who said, "Man, know thyself." I'm going on a journey to know myself. All this kind of thing. These tropes, these words that are used, but how have we done it? Have we taken the time to get to know ourselves? And when we've discovered some things about ourselves, or we live in that reality? I'm not saying say you discover within yourself, say something that's nefarious, something that you don't like. Well, the point is, it doesn't mean, okay, well, that's how I have to live. I'm going to live my life like a serial killer now. No, it means, how am I going to adjust myself to the things that I find within myself? How am I going to begin to understand the reality of who I am? Because the truth be told, as people, we're amazing people. And many times the nefarious and the terrible things that come out of us as people, our bad behaviors, as it were, are actually the result, the cause and effect, the effect of the cause, which is actually the wounds we carry as individuals. As individual men, we carry wounds for so many different reasons. And some of it's in our DNA, some of it's because of wounds that our entire culture have been carrying. That's a huge thing. That's something that needs to be sometimes addressed as well. But within our own individual lives, we can look at enough instances if we are prepared to look. And this is the thing. When you meet older people and you're like, why are they like that, right? When they carry on in certain ways, it's because there's unresolved issues in their lives. When you meet people in general, many times you will encounter people and they'll do things and say things and behave in particular ways that it's just destructive. There's nothing positive or meaningful about it. What we're looking at here is unresolved issues in those people's lives. Hurting people hurt people, the saying goes, and that's the truth of the matter. Unless we resolve what's hurting, just the same as, like, you cut yourself, you don't just go and leave that thing gaping and dripping blood everywhere, right? You go wash the wound, you put a plaster on it. If it needs a bandage, you put a bandage. You do what it takes to be able to help that thing to heal and put it right. But we don't do the same with our emotional wounds. We live in a culture and a society, in large part, that ignores the fact that this gaping wound, this emotional thing that hit us, sideways, is unaddressed within our lives, and then as a result, we're literally just dripping blood and bones hanging out, and things going on within ourselves that, like, it's kind of obvious to everybody who encounters you, but there's nothing being done about it. And so that's our individual unique responsibility as people. We can carry our wounds almost like a kind of a badge of honor. We can sometimes, in this world, because we're all doing it, because it becomes like a cultural thing to just be a bit of a nutter, to be a bit loopy, then we all kind of bring our dysfunction to the table, and it just becomes like like that's how life is, right? But actually there's a higher level of living that's available to us all. So many times we wonder why we don't get things done, why life just stays in this place, in this shallow existence, in this frustrating place. And oftentimes, if we would address the various different issues of life, we could move beyond. So with all that being said, I'm saying that simply just to kind of give a bit of a premise with regards to why here at the Idea of a Man, we're doing what we're doing at the Idea of a Man, because in my own lived experience, I have encountered that by dealing with issues, life can be rocketed into propelled into a whole different strata of experience, of lived experience, and of existence. And I wish that for you. I wish that you will be able to live the life you're here to live, and that it'll be positive and meaningful as a man. We're dealing here with men's issues, with men's work, because we need to do self-development and work with ourselves across the board. But my specific calling is to men. For some reason, I have a particular heart that cares for the journey we go through as men. And I think in large part, I'm going to mention this on this podcast initially, before we get right into the meat and bones of what we're going to talk about today. My father suffered from multiple sclerosis throughout his life. And so when I look back on his life, one of the things that I really observed was the frustration that he used to experience when he couldn't do man things. He was not able to be like a protector and a provider for the family. He wasn't able to go out and get a job. He wasn't able to kind of, he wasn't any kind of a threat to anybody who had a threat to us as a family, because he was physically disabled. He was incapable of being that man. And so in experiencing him and having to, as a child, kind of pick him up off the floor if he had a fall or something of that kind, I observed his struggles and had an emotional connection, really, and even a pain, really, as a result of observing these things taking place in my father's life. But what I've seen is that as a result, I think I've been able to recognize a similar kind of pain in many men who are much more physically capable, much more outwardly seem to be able to handle their business and do what they need to do. But the truth be told, there's still like this inadequacy, or there's this limitation, or this lack. And it's like, well, what's wrong? I mean, you don't have a disability as far as I can see. I mean, I know that every disability is visible, but what's the issue here? And the issue can be so many things. But like we just talked about, sometimes it's the unresolved within our lives. Sometimes it's the pains we carry. Sometimes it's the lack of acknowledgement for the hard work we've put in, the things we've done. Sometimes it's just the way that life can be as men, and the confusion of what it is to be a man. And that's again why the idea of a man is called the idea of a man. And we need to look at what is the idea of a man? What is it to be a man? Because again, society has many ideas that they're trying to put out there. Women will have ideas with regards to what you should be as a man. Other men will kind of place different kind of burdens upon your shoulders with regards to, we expect this of you as a man. And so society does this. And we have to conclude for ourselves, what kind of man am I? What am I here to do? What's my contribution? And as you look up along the huge vista of different types of men and different types of lived experience, there's a unique life that you are here to live, a unique contribution that you're here to bring to the world. But if you're comparing yourself against others and doing all these things that we so easily do when we live unconsciously, the unexamined life is not worth living, when we don't take the time to examine what it is we're doing in our thinking and really live more intentionally, we can be hampered by the dysfunction that happens so naturally by these emotional states we get into when we're comparing ourselves, thinking, I'm not as buff as this guy, I'm not as intelligent as this person, I don't make as much money as another human being, etc., and so on and so forth. So by stripping away all the nonsense, getting to the truth of, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm here to do, and then fuck the rest, okay? Literally, just it does not the rest. It doesn't matter. It's not your job. I think it's Rumi. There's the little story of the king sends the guy into the village to go and do one errand for him, and the guy gets there, and in the midst of the village, he's doing a million different things, and he comes back to the king, and the king's like, hello, how did it go? And he's like, well, yeah, I did this, I did that, I did a third thing. And the king's like, well, did you get the errand done that I sent you to do? And he's like, well, no, but I was doing all this other stuff. And he's like, well, off with your head, bruv. Do you know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, if you don't complete the mission that you as a unique individual are here to do, you might do a million quote unquote good things or not, or whatever you get up to. But if you don't do what you're actually here to do, then you miss the mark. You miss the whole point of your existence. And so therefore, kind of stripping back everything to know why you're here as a unique individual, like just getting to know your truth and living that and not worrying about anything else, is such a powerful thing to do. So at the idea of man, we take you through 12 steps initially, which is basically to first of all identify who you are. We ask, who am I? Where do I fit? And then how do I go from survival mode into thrival mode? After we've done that initial kind of quarter of the 12 steps, where we've laid that foundation, we get straight into it with business, finances, and then we look at recreation. So after we've got all that kind of, right, we've got a strategy on how we're going to live our lives and conduct our affairs on this earth in the marketplace, how are we going to relax and chill and get back into ourselves? Because again, we're talking about the fact that we are generating the energy to live our lives from ourselves, not from the external, but from an actual knowledge of ourselves. So recreation, recreating yourself, putting yourself back together is imperative on this journey. The other thing is how we show up in our relationships. So first we look at our intimate relationships, our familial relationships, that's our relationship with our family members across the board, and then our male friendships. Male friendship is a huge thing. Loneliness amongst males is massive. But how do we build meaningful associations with other males who can actually support us, who can actually, we can all help each other get to where we need to be, as opposed to in just, competitive relationships that are not actually helping us all to grow and to mature and to deal with our stuff. How do we actually do that? So we talk about those things. But after we've done that, we get into more existential matters, and this is where we are right now. So the last podcast we did was literally talking about spirit. So we're talking about spiritual matters. We're talking about how we are as spiritual beings. At the idea of a man, we're not interested in promoting or purporting any kind of ideological perspective, religious perspective that is not practical spirituality. We're not actually here trying to tell you what your spirituality should be. Everything at the idea of a man is about you finding and discovering for yourself what your truth is. So therefore, we strongly encourage you to do that, go on that journey for yourself, but also in that process to really examine and explore, is what I'm subscribing to on a spiritual level actually practically helping me in any way, shape, or form? Or am I subscribing to ideologies and perspectives and ways of thinking that really don't have any benefit to my life or to anybody else's life around me? Because there are so many ideologies out there which are just that. They're just ideologies. They're just philosophical fluff. And life is too short to mess around with that kind of thing. We need to move beyond that. We need to mature. We need to get to a place where the spiritual dimension is very real. And in what we're going to talk about today, which is the realm of the soul, we're going to experience and explore that a little bit further. The next podcast we will do in the end of our 12 steps is going to be literally to discuss body. We're going to talk about health on the physical level. Obviously, we're holistic beings, so the physical health ties into our mental and emotional health and well-being as well. All these things are tied in, and we need to discuss them in some depth and detail, because as men, oftentimes we neglect that aspect of ourselves, and as a result, oftentimes we are experiencing dis-ease in our physical beings that we don't need to be experiencing, that we could actually transcend and have much better outcomes in regards to how our health is going if we paid better attention and paid a bit attention sooner. So let's get into the subject. After these 12 steps, we will be going through the 4 archetypes of the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover individually, because of the 2, I suppose, main predominant subjects that the idea of a man is all about really is going to be these 12 steps, and then also the 4 archetypes. The archetypes have changed my life in terms of my encounter with them on my own journey, as I began to really have to go and do deeper work on my experience and on my process. They've helped me to be able to identify aspects of what's going on within me so that they could heal. And in healing, say, the king within myself, and we'll talk about that a little bit more actually as we get into this subject. So let's do that. So today we're going to be talking literally here about the soul. And if, say, for example, we were to look at you as a person, if I meet you on the street and I encounter you, I'm going to see your body. Sure, that's great. And so oftentimes within our limited thinking, we relax at that point. We're quite good with associating you simply with that body that we experience, that we see in front of us. But the truth be told, like say, even here, as I'm conveying my thoughts and I'm talking to you here at the idea of a man, my mind, thoughts are coming in from here and there, and I'm beginning to bring them down, download them, and I'm articulating them out through my mouth. But where do those thoughts originate? Because they don't originate in the physical dimension. They're not coming from this plane of existence and experience. Okay, there is aspects of us that transcend what we have here in terms of our physical being. Okay, but our awareness of that is often not very much. We don't really pay much attention to that on a day-to-day basis, because like I said earlier on, we talk about practical spirituality. We don't really see the practical application of spending our energy and our time thinking from that perspective, and many times that's perhaps a default or a negative aspect of the way we're educated. Because the truth be told, if we were able to say you've got our 5 senses, if you were educated from a young age to actually understand, say, the 6th sense, the things that transcend the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the ears, and the touch, if you could actually be more aware of, say, the aura around a person, and you were able to see that, if you began to use your third eye more, and see and perceive things in the spiritual dimension in your day-to-day life more, you would enhance your capacity to exist on a certain level. And our society, the world we're living in right now, doesn't teach us and train us in that way. We're not taught from a young age like that, and so we don't do it. Somebody once said, and it was an interesting thought, that if, say, for example, you had a baby, and rather than the parents kind of coming in and bringing the bottle to the baby and changing the baby's nappy, they kind of were on strings, and they were able to kind of fly on invisible strings, change the baby's nappy, feed the baby, do all the stuff that the baby needs, and they continually did that. Would the baby think that that's normal and learn to fly? And who knows, right? Okay, we know that as bodies we don't have wings per se, right? But I do believe that it's potentially possible that the limitations of what that baby perceives as normal might be very different. And so, therefore, if we have the capacity within our mind and emotions to look at life and existence from a deeper perspective, what would actually be possible for us? I think we would broaden our understanding. However, within the lives we're living, when we take a little bit of time to just consider the lives we are living, and we think about the fact that, say, we have conversations with the man down the street, the person next door, our spouse, whatever, and we understand that the thoughts that are actually colliding in our minds and then coming out through our mouths are beyond this physical dimension. They're coming from a place. And we begin to understand, well, or ask ourselves the question, what is that? What is that place? Then we begin to become more aware for a moment that there's actually a bit more to life than simply what we can touch and taste and feel and see with the physical eye. At that point, you then have to begin to ask deeper questions with regards to what is that. So we won't get into all the dynamics and the scientific ins and outs of that in this particular conversation. That's a conversation that you can look into for yourself. Hopefully, if you've never thought about it, you may well be a person who's fully adept in these matters and know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, then perhaps it's a journey you can go on. But if not, um, let's assume that you have an understanding of what I'm waffling about at this particular point. And let's go from there to the point of where we talk about the fact that as beings, we have this body, yes, but we also exist within the dimension that we're talking about, which is the spiritual dimension. And within that dimension, is actually the essence of who you are. So you as a being, we use this word a lot, soul. We don't use it so much in our current day and age, but we're familiar with the word. It's not like a completely unfamiliar word. The truth be told, you're a soul. And your soul is deeper than we are led to understand in many ways. In religion, it's often talked about. It's talked about from the perspective of say in the religion I was brought up in, which was Christianity. They want to save your soul. They want to fish for men. They want to drag souls into their organizations through evangelism and stuff, so that they can basically corral your soul and almost imprison your soul and guide and direct your soul. Now, souls transcend all that. You can't really trap a soul, but you could think you do. You can certainly trap a human's life so that they get caught up in your cult or ideological whatever, and do your bidding. People do that. There's a lot of organizations, there's a lot of workplaces, a lot of businesses. You can get caught up in a job that could literally take your soul almost. You know what I'm saying? Like, make you so distracted by your activities and responsibilities and things that you never get chance in your life to actually pay attention to your soul, to who you actually are, to the essences of your truth. And because we are so unaware of this aspect of ourselves, we can live our whole lives unaware sorry, of this reality. And I'm going to give you a personal story in my own life. The soul, when you read some of the deeper, more existential books, the Nag Hammadi scripts, to be precise, actually will speak about there's a book in there called The Treatise on the Soul, which conveys the fact that the soul is feminine, right? So here we are as men, and this is why we're talking about the idea of a man, because, like, what is, if I'm a man and my soul is female, what does that say about life and about the idea of what a man is, right? Again, we start to get onto kind of shaky ground when we want to kind of see every aspect of who we are as just male and masculine, right? And so, as integrated beings, or if you want to live a more integrated life, you want to understand yourself more, if you want to answer the question of who am I, we have to have a deeper understanding of what we're actually dealing with here, because otherwise we're going to live in a very narrow parameter of what's possible for us and of what's true. Okay, and so therefore we have to expand our consciousness if in fact that concept, like what I just said, is that the soul is female, is true. And that's something you might have to go on your own journey to kind of discover for yourself and ask and answer questions. However, the in psychology, like Jungian psychology, they'll talk about things like the anima. The anima is supposed to be, like we often talk in modern parlance, of the inner feminine. Now, let's strip that back. So on my personal journey, on my personal experience, when I began to have to go deeper because of my own having to confront my own addictions, my own issues, unresolved stuff in my life, I got some counseling from a tremendous guy called Ed Rook, who you can discover on the internet. I strongly recommend him as a life coach, as a healer, as a counselor. He helped me immensely on my journey, and I was doing a course with him, which is called what's it called? SSE, no, ASE, Advanced Sexual Empowerment, powerful course. So I was in the process of doing this course, and in the midst of it, he did a meditation with us as a group of men. This was online, and in the midst of the meditation, he got us to identify the inner feminine and the inner masculine within ourselves. He told us that the inner feminine we would encounter like on the left hand side of ourselves, and the inner masculine we'd find on the right hand side of ourselves. And as he took us through the guided meditation, he brought us to a place where we encountered them. I can't remember specifically what he did, or what he said, or what that process was. You'd have to ask him. But one thing I can say is that for me, and I didn't expect much in the process. I was, as interested as anybody else. Like, okay, let's do this. Let's find out what this is all about. But what shored it up for me, what made it a very significant experience, was the fact that when I became aware of the inner feminine within myself, I became distinctly aware that she was kind of afraid of me. She wasn't like running towards me. She wasn't like, she wasn't welcoming to me. In fact, she was looking the other way and running the other way. Now, for me as a person, like, I was kind of raised to be a nice guy. I always kind of, had a kind of a soft spot for mum, for the feminine. I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be a brute. I didn't want to be an abuser. I wanted to be somebody who loved my wife, for example, etc. Loved my daughters. So to encounter the feminine within myself and see this like that did a lot to me emotionally. Like I began to cry. So we're a group of men, we're all online, on Zoom, and I'm sitting there and tears started to roll down my eyes, man, and I'm feeling a kind of way about this situation. And so two things that I need to kind of point out. I guess the first thing is, when I began to become aware of the emotions that this aspect of myself was going through, I had to first of all acknowledge that this is very real. This is not just something that we're all just talking about here, like my inner feminine, right? This part of myself has a life that's going on, but also there's a life that's going on that I don't even know anything about, that I'm not aware of, that I have not been paying attention to, and that maybe in a big way I'm going to need to pay some attention to understand what's going on here. So that experience for me started me on a journey, and over the months and weeks that went on, my inner feminine began to show up in my dreams at times, and as I continued to do the work of counselling and personal development that I was in to resolve my issues, I had to begin to cultivate a relationship and an understanding with this part of myself to understand what they are. And as I began to read and read more and read James Hollis, the Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life, and Rod Boothroyd, and all these things, a lot of other books, something that really began to strike me and get an understanding was, okay, wait a minute. So when they use the word psych in psychology, psych literally refers to the soul, okay? The soul we're talking about is actually the inner feminine, the anima. It's interchangeable. They use the word anima, it refers to the soul, refers to the inner feminine, refers to the psyche. So we're talking about psych in psychology. We're actually talking about your soul. If you are having psychological issues, if you're finding that you are dysfunctional in that aspect of your life, it's very possible as an individual that your relationship to your soul, to your inner feminine, is in some way or another askew. Now, for us as men who perhaps don't even acknowledge the inner feminine, or we just have it as a kind of rough concept that sure, okay, men have some inner feminine and whatever else, and women have an inner masculine. Um, we're kind of maybe missing the point. We're not seeing the gravity or the reality of this situation and how it's affecting us. And when we consider that this actually is our psychology, if our psychology is messed up, this is what can either drive negative behaviors or end us in like mental homes. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of important. It's important that we get an understanding of what's going on here so we can clear up our dysfunctions. We can heal our mental emotional wounds. We can be balanced as people, we can begin to function in a way that's useful. So, first of all, let's clear up. If our soul, the inner feminine, is feminine, right? We need to, first of all, as an individual, begin to embrace that aspect of ourselves because as men, first and foremost, our relationship is to ourselves. Our relationship on this world, in this, all of life is about relationships, our interactions with other people, but also our interaction with ourselves. How are we interacting with ourselves? What do we think of ourselves? Do we love ourselves? Because there are parts to who we are, there's parts to ourselves. And part of ourselves, a huge part, a part that we need to be really paying attention to, is our inner feminine, is our souls, is our psychology. And we neglect this part of ourselves for a lot of different reasons. In my own life, one of the things that I began to identify that was causing the problem. So I regard myself as a relatively masculine man. You be the judge, you know what I'm saying? But, for myself, I didn't see myself as effeminate, okay? However, what I began to identify as I began to look at the archetypes was that the role of, say, the more masculine archetypes, the king and the warrior, were kind of in shadow within my life. So what I mean by that is that the king was not sitting upon his throne. The picture is like in Lord of the Rings when you come across the king of I can't remember the horse town, and he's got that guy Grimoire or whatever is like speaking into his ear, and he's all kind of grayed over and stuff, and Gandalf has to come and pull him out of his state. Right, that's the picture of the abdicated king as an archetype, a king that's not sitting upon the throne of his life and not operating in his sovereignty. Okay, the archetype of the man who's operating in his sovereignty is the king. In the Return of the King, the final one of the Lord of the Rings, if you're familiar with the film, is Aragorn. So, as individual men, we have to understand that we have a right to exist without apology or justification, that we need to operate from a place of sovereignty, from our sovereign right to exist. And then when we don't, that either one of two things happen. Either we begin to overcompensate for an authority that we don't feel, or we begin to operate in a way that is kind of, we disregard our responsibilities, and we step down from our place of actually operating and functioning as a sovereign person. So in many ways, I've done that in my life because I didn't want to be the kind of guy who kind of pushed my weight around or anything of that kind. I want to be a kind of a nice guy, as it were. And so as a result, I'd abdicated that aspect of myself, so I wasn't living in my fullness. Likewise with the warrior. With the warrior, if we don't bring the warrior into its rightful place, where we set right boundaries around ourselves, we also use the energy within ourselves to go out and get the things we need to get to make our lives work and make sense. If we feel kind of pulled back, we don't feel that we have a right to exist, we haven't dealt with the wounds that our warriors carry, that's the archetype of the warrior within ourselves, then we again abdicate an aspect of our masculinity, of who we are as people. And in this world, we'll often find that the women around us sometimes have stronger sovereignty, stronger warriors in their psychology than we do. And there's nothing wrong with that. All of us need to have strong sovereignty, strong warrior within our lives. But there's a lot of things in society, because as men, we've been listening to a lot of voices, a lot of suggestions, a lot of ideologies. So we abdicate these aspects of ourselves because we're trying to become socially acceptable. We're trying to become nice guys. We're trying to become whatever it is we're subscribing to because of whatever reasons. And in that process, sometimes we lose things, and I had lost things. I had not been a protector to myself. I had not been a I'd not been sovereign to myself. I'd let people walk over me. I'd let people treat me some kind of way. And by default of that, my soul was not comfortable and happy living within my existence. In fact, she was scared of me because I wasn't protecting her. I wasn't protecting myself. I wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't paying enough attention to myself. And our first responsibility in life, once you're not a baby and your parents are there dotting over you and making sure that your every single need is met, as you kind of grow through the ages of childhood and you pass that stage, particularly when you enter into adulthood, you become your own responsibility. Now, if you weren't looked after particularly well, or it wasn't instilled in you that in fact you have a right to exist without apology or justification, and all those kind of things through your upbringing, it may well be that you haven't got the understanding that looking after yourself well is actually an important thing. However, I'm here to tell you today that in fact, looking after yourself properly is both your responsibility and is also a tremendous privilege. And yourself will thank you for it. Like, your life will get better when you start looking after yourself properly. Okay? So let's start from that basis. Let's get that real clear understanding here as men, because I think a lot of our issues would be resolved if we'll pay more attention to what's happening for us mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. On a physical level, sometimes it just takes, we have to just stop. Like, we could be workaholics, we could be so driven, so pushing ourselves because we have that monkey on our back, that need to kind of provide, or to to make money, to get ahead in the world, to be what we need to be somebody of substance, of whatever it is we feel we're trying to fulfill out here, right? But if you're not taking the time to look after yourself properly, to have a good bath and then just go to bed, have a decent meal, something nutritious, if you're just living on junk food, if you're doing all the various different things we often find ourselves doing because we're not looking after ourselves properly, loving ourselves properly, paying attention to ourselves properly, we pay the price. The toll comes due, and it's due to us, okay? So we have to change our perspectives on who we are. And a good part of that can sometimes be when you actually recognize the woman within inside of you, the inner feminine, right? Your soul, your psychology. These things are kind of complicated. You're going to probably have to get your own revelation of this for yourself and how this plays out in your own life. But at the end of the day, paying attention, say, to your environment, your living space, how you dress, how you live your life, all these things help you to be able to live from a place that enables you to express what's going on for you. Also, that part of yourself is connected to the creator, to the source, to that which animates and creates all of life. Now, each and every single one of us as unique individuals, if you imagine that source is out there in the vastness of the universe, and every single one of us are a part of that, just like a drop of the ocean is still a part of the ocean. We're all connected by the invisible umbilical cords to where we all originally came from, the original womb from which we all are hewn. And our soul, our eternal essence, that part of ourselves, that aspect of who we actually are, the daughter of Source, exists within inside of ourselves, and it's a privilege to have a soul. There's a lot of talk on the internet and on different parts of life as regards to whether or not certain kinds of people have souls and stuff, and I don't know the answers to all those questions. I'm specifically speaking to people who have souls. So if you don't have one, I don't really know what to say to you. But if you do, and you identify that there is a soul within you, I'm exhorting you to develop or cultivate a relationship with that aspect of yourself, with the voice in your head, with the entity that exists inside of you, to know that part of yourself better, to pay more attention to what's going on there for you, and be more intentional about how you interact with that element of yourself, because that aspect of yourself is here to live a creative life, is here to live a meaningful life, is here to live an intentional life. And you can, by knowing yourself and interrogating yourself with regards to what you're here to do, what your purpose is, the first questions we ask here at the Idea of a Man: who are you, where do you fit, and how do you thrive, right? The essence of what we're talking about is how we go into thrival mode as opposed to survival mode. We're all, our bodies are going to do what they can to survive, to stay alive, okay? And sometimes that's just eat some junk food because we're just trying to sustain ourselves for another hour. But if you want to live a meaningful life for the rest of your life, then you're going to have to think deeper. You're going to have a bigger, broader vision about how you're going to conduct your affairs. And so therefore, just following the agenda of survival is not going to help you to thrive on this planet or in your life. You're not going to live a meaningful life that you're going to look back on and say, I lived an amazing existence. Here at the Idea of a Man, we want you to live an amazing existence. I believe you want to live an amazing existence. If you don't want to live an amazing existence, you listen to the wrong podcast and you're in the wrong space. Go and find people who are talking about how to live ridiculous existences. There's lots of people doing that stuff out here. Here at the Idea of a Man, we're all about one thing: how we can live amazing existences that are lined up with the essences of who we are as people, where we can get to know ourselves for who we are, and we can allow that to flow through. So identifying what is going on within the depths of who we are, the depths of who we are, the real essences of who we are. It's not so far away. It's right there within ourselves. The problem is oftentimes we haven't given ourselves permission. We haven't given ourselves permission because nobody else ever gave us permission. You weren't brought up, say, to have permission to do the things you really want to do, to be everything you want to be. So many of us are kind of trained to do specific kind of professions because they're respectable, to live particular ways. People end up doing things that, say, just prop up the system. You become a GP, you become a lawyer, and then what you're doing in these kind of roles sometimes is just to perpetuate the ways of our society. Like, for example, you could be a GP all your life and then come across like holistic medicine, and you might meet a doctor who does holistic medicine and does it exceptionally well and actually gets results, and people are getting healed from the things that you're doing. But you can't just ditch everything you've been trained to do because you suddenly find something that's more effective and impactful, because you've invested all your energy, your time, your money, your resources, and all your social societal kind of acceptance, your parental acceptance. Your parents kind of pushed you in this specific direction, and so you feel like as if you're doing something meaningful in the world, but in fact you might just be handing out drugs to people that in fact are not actually doing anything to heal them. And so this is the case with so many things that just prop up our society. And what we are as individual men being called to do is to go deeper, is to ask ourselves, what is the call of the soul within us, the essences of who we are? How do we get to know that aspect of ourselves and then to live creatively from that truth, from that space, to know and to discover and embrace our truth, to understand who she is, what she's all about, what she wants, and let her be the muse within us. Let her be the inspiration that enables us to do the things we do, to project out into this world the things that they want to create and the things that are the depth of our being wants to put out into this world. We can transform how we live as individual men. We can do amazing things once we get to actually know ourselves. And this is why we go back to that initial thing, man. Man specifically is what it says, man, know thyself. So here you are as a man, you're living your life. You've got all the confusion with regards to society saying you need to be this, you need to be a really hyper masculine guy, you need to be an excessively good, nice guy, whatever the case would be, all these different messages, and they're conflicting. Get rid of your toxic masculinity, or we love toxic masculinity over here, all the women want you to be a toxic male, whatever. Forget what the women want, forget what the this people want, forget what the whoever wants, right? What do you want? Ask and answer the question for yourself. What do you want? I'm talking about like in a holistic way. What does your body want? What does your being want, from the perspective of like what's gonna enable you to live healthy and whole? What's going to enable you to kind of make it, to live like a long, productive, fruitful existence where your life is generative, where it's meaningful to you and to others, where the people, say, in your family are benefited from the life that you're living, where you are benefited from the life that you're living. When you look at yourself in the mirror in the morning, you're like, you know what? I respect the person that's looking back at me, as opposed to like looking at yourself like, oh, here we go again, man. You know what I'm saying? And that's just choices away. That's just dependent or swiveling upon how integrated we're willing to become, and integrated with ourselves, not with anything external, just with ourselves. How willing are we to develop and cultivate a meaningful relationship with ourselves? So we've been talking here at the Idea of a Man today about the soul, and it's a deep conversation. It's a meaningful conversation. It's meaningful because really it cultivates it. It's all about our relationship with ourselves. So in a sense, it encapsulates the essence of everything that the Idea of a Man is all about. And so I hope that you've enjoyed what we've been discussing. Next week we will be talking specifically about the body, and we'll be kind of going in there with regards to how do we look after and love our bodies in a way that's meaningful, so that our bodies can heal, can be whole, can be healthy. I've got work to do in that capacity myself. I'm slightly overweight, and I'm overweight. Let's be honest. and I've got work to do. So here at the Ideal Man, I'm hoping that you'll join me on that journey as I develop myself and work on some of the things, the issues that are prevalent in my existence. And I'm hoping to see and hear the testimonies of other men who, as well, as we embrace our truth, as we begin to love ourselves for who we are and invest and sow the seeds of goodness into our existence, we're going to all reap harvests of healing, of wholeness, of help, and of a completely different ball game. So let's go on that journey together. Let's not be like strangers to each other. Let's leave comments. Let's interact. And until next time, have an amazing week. We'll speak again very soon. Thank you.